Everyone, welcome to this month's question of the month. So, just to get straight to it, this month's question comes from Shaina. She's asking about Gomukhasana, specifically about her inability to bind her hands, get her hands to touch behind her back when she reaches one arm over the top, one arm from underneath. She says it's never been close, it hasn't changed. She's been practicing yoga for years, and of course, that gets frustrating after some time. So what's going on? She wants to know why she can't get them anywhere near each other. So when you've been practicing for years, you know how it is when we practice. We all know change happens slowly, of course. When we start, change happens very quickly, and then it kind of plateaus for a while. But we see some change. Things get closer, little things change, whatever. When you stop seeing that, and it's been years, and you haven't seen any progress on something, it's time to get out of the mode of what do I need to stretch or what do I need to strengthen, and kind of maybe push muscles aside for a moment, which is primarily what we would be changing through our yoga practice, and look at other factors. And there's two that come up for me. One is proportions. If you have relatively short arms relative to a long torso, you can imagine that would make it difficult for those fingers to touch it, much less grab. So that's one possibility. Check proportions. Number two is bone shape. Now, generally speaking, we have similar bone shapes, or similar enough that it doesn't make a big difference. However, there is a small portion, small percentage of people on both ends, more flexible, more restrictive type of bone shapes, and this primarily happens at the shoulder joint and at the hip joint. Of course, it can be in other places. The ankle joint maybe is number three. There's a few places, but for the most part, our knee joints are pretty similar. Even more similar than, let's say, the difference might be found in a hip or a shoulder. Okay, so they're a little bit more variable. Now, we're talking shoulders. What are we talking about in shoulders? And I've talked about this before. You can also look it up. There's three types of scapula that are identified. Everybody in the anatomy world, recognizes this. One's more restrictive for certain movements, one's more freeing for movements, and the one that the majority of people have is somewhere in the middle. So most of us have that one in the middle, okay? But, and here's the thing to remember, when we abduct our arm, this part of our humerus bumps into this part of our humerus. Right? This is the acromion that you feel out at the end. That's the very edge of your shoulder joint. Feel a little bone there. That's the back corner of it. And then you come around, little shelf, and then you feel the bump. The bump is where the clavicle meets the scapula. So when you abduct your arm, you only abduct, most people abduct to about 90 degrees. Don't take the model too literally either. It's just a plastic model. But about 90 degrees. Then bones bump. Everything above that point, for the majority of people, is a movement of the scapula. So from here, abduct, and then to take my arm here, I am upwardly rotating my scapula after I've abducted the shoulder joint itself. If you have more restriction here, that will make it even harder to get your arm up, much less than bend the elbow and take it down. Now, in Gomukhasana, that could be a factor. It also can impact rotation and your ability to rotate, especially this one, which is internal, which can get more difficult. I don't think you're going to find a bone shape problem with the scapula, but it could be a mobility issue with the scapula as well. So we've got proportions. Bone shape is the second factor. I'd have to see Shaina to know which one of those two if it were going to be. And the third, less likely but possible, is some mobility issue in the scapula. Okay, so those are the three potential reasons. If I saw Shaina, maybe I'd narrow it down to one of those or two of those. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, if you got a question, you want me to answer it on camera, go to yoganatomy.com/my question.